Last week, we read about how Esther requested another day for the Jews to continue their killing and against all those who hated the Jews and wanted in all of the 127 provinces. And they asked, Esther asked to continue before they had the results, to continue even in Shushan Abirah, in Shushan, for another day, and the king agreed to her request. We read, I'm going to share the screen now. We read in Esther chapter 9, no, chapter 9, and ותאמר אסתר אל המלך טוב, יינתן גם מחר ליהודים אשר בשושן, give us another day as they did today, and the king agreed that that be done, and that's really where the Shoshana Binah had another day of killing the enemies of the Jews, those who hated the Jews. And the king made a proclamation and it was done. And that's what actually happened. And again, they did not lay their hands on the spoil. That means that they were not out for anything other than to get rid of the Jews, get rid of the people who hated the Jews. And the total numbers were given of 75,000 killed in the whole country of people who were the enemies of the Jews, and they also didn't put their hands on the spoil. And now we come to where we want to start today. What was the result of this? And that happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and they rested on the 14th day, and it was a day of feasting and merrymaking. That 14th day, that year, was a day of joy and happiness and mishteh v'simcha, joyous feasting. We can imagine that the all over the country, all the people who hated the Jews were annihilated and destroyed. And the Jews in Shushan, they carried out on the 13th and the 14th and rested on the 15th, and they made the 15th a day of feasting and merrymaking, of joy for the people. Now we after the event, and we're going to see how Mordechai and Esther wanted to turn this from a singular event, a historical event, into a holiday. And this is a very brazen and courageous act on the part of Mordechai and Esther, religiously, theologically. I mean, we don't have any holidays added. In fact, the Torah says you cannot add, you cannot take away. You have to, you can't add. So how did Mordechai and Esther, and why, not only how, but why did they feel this historical event was deserving of another holiday? It's an example of their view. It's not just because it was them. They're viewing something about Jewish history and about God's hand in history through the event that happened. And it's a different way of relating to God, history, Am Yisrael, that they saw now in their time, that really sends something going forward for these thousands of years of Galut. And it was so important for them and for us, the message that they saw through these events, that they saw it's important to turn it into another holiday. And we have to remember, the events transpire on Pesach. The decree happens on the 13th of Nisan, the 14th, 15th, 16th, they're fasting, that's the Seder nights, and the events of the Esther's parties, the unveiling of Haman, the revealing of his evil plans, happen on Pesach. So Esther and Mordechai see this as another kind of Pesach, another kind of salvation of the Jews, a kind that happens not through open miracles like the Makot. It happens not through open miracles like the Kriyat Yam Suf, but it's an alternate Pesach, a Pesach not of God's being revealed, but a Pesach of Hashem's being 1 second. A Pesach of Hashem's being hidden. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I just realized. Do you hear me?
I missed a few sessions.
So what they're making is an alternative kind of Pesach, a Pesach of not of God's revelation, but a Pesach when God is hidden, where the name of God doesn't appear at all. And that is what we're going to look at now. The turning of this event, historical event, into a holiday. Now, this is not an easy thing for the people, for Jewish people, for the Am Yisrael to accept. We know in our own time, for example, there are Israeli Independence Day, for example, or the day that Jerusalem was liberated. These are days that are in controversy. There are people that celebrate them joyously, and there are people that refuse to celebrate them. And it's all over the Jewish people. You have this conflict of people who realize that this was a holiday, and people say, "No, what do you mean it's not a holiday because of this and that and that?" And they don't celebrate it. So it's not such an easy thing that they did to get this event and the joy that they had turned into a holiday, and that's what we're going to look at now. And we're going to first let's look at the verses that speak about this. So I'm gonna share the screen now, and okay, hold on a second. Okay, so that is why the Jews, the village Jews who live in unwalled towns, observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and make it a day of merrymaking and feasting, and as a holiday, an occasion for the sending of gifts to one another. That's what they did. They feasted, they sent gifts, they were happy. Why? Because they won. But now, Mordechai recorded these events, and he sent dispatches to all the Jews throughout the provinces, near and far, charging them to observe the 14th and the 15th days of Adar every year, the same months, the same days on which the Jews enjoyed relief from their foes, and the same month which was transformed for them from grief to mourning to joy, to observe them as days of feasting, merrymaking, an occasion for sending gifts to one another and presents to the poor. So now, this is the if you have to say, this is the 3 of the 4 mitzvot on Purim are mentioned over here. Feasting, right? So that's Ishteh v'simcha. It's one of the things that on Thursday this week, in a couple of days, we're going to have the feasting. We're going to have a meal. Merrymaking. Usually, that's the meal is accompanied with alcoholic drinks. Sending gifts to one another. We give mishloach manot. We send some baked goods or some cooked goods for the meal. That's the idea that it should be. We share, just like on Shabbat, sometimes we share food and that. And of course, just like in the holidays in the Torah, the Shalosh Regalim in the Torah, the 3 major holidays of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the Torah always goes out of its way to say, especially in Sefer Devarim, you should not forget the poor. Your holiday is incomplete if the poor people are not taking part in your holiday. Here also, when Mordechai is making a holiday, new holiday, he is going to include the poor people as part of what happens on the holiday. So he makes a holiday similar to the Shalosh Regalim. This is the first new holiday added to the Jewish calendar. And it's added about 800, 900 years after the Torah was given to Am Yisrael. So Um, Here you have Am Yisrael accepting this. The Kibel HaYehudim, right? And the Jews assumed this. They took on this practice, and they took on what already was a spontaneous practice on the first year of just complete joy at winning the war, and they took it on as a custom. But it's a far cry from being a custom to being an official holiday. Like you can have a custom of we play every Sunday we play poker. Every that it's a custom we have, but it's not official. Not official. So the Jews took this on. They assumed this as an obligation. The Kibel HaYehudim, what they started to do, and what Mordechai wrote, and they go here. You have a quick recap of the events that happened, and Al Ken Karu, for this reason, these days are named Purim. Purim has to do with the lottery. In view then of all the instructions in the said letter of what they had experienced in that matter, what befall of what the Jews undertook, undertook and irrevocably obligated themselves and their descendants, and all who might join them, to observe these 2 days in the manner prescribed and at the proper time each year. This is a much more significant than just, we did it last year, we'll do it this year, maybe we'll do it next year. This, they took it as irrevocable. They accepted it irrevocably as an obligation, and it'll never be taken back on them and their descendants and all people who convert to Judaism, that they'll keep these days forever, these 2 days. Now, this is a very bold attempt. Why did Mordechai decide to turn this historical event into a holiday forever? And that's really the question. It's not only because it happened to them. It's because this is a new way of God relating to the world, a new way of God relating to Am Yisrael when they're in exile. We do not see in the story of Esther God's name mentioned. No one brings it up. We don't see any open miracles. We do not see any splitting of the sea or 10 plagues or sticks turning into snakes or blood turning into nothing. It is the way God relates to Am Yisrael when he is hidden. But more than that, it's the way that Am Yisrael has to function when God is hidden. And here is really the novelty that Mordechai and Esther saw in Purim, in the events that happened in Shushan in the 5th century BCE. What they see here is God's not going to act, so we have to. God cannot be dependent on to act. We have to act ourselves. And you might even say, in a period of God's hiding his face, what are we going to do? It's up to us to act. Mordechai is one of the main heroes of this story, because Mordechai acts politically, strategically, and he acts from weakness. He acts strategically to garner power. And he does get this power by making right moves, by being involved, and by taking advantage of opportunities. The opportunities he took advantage of, he was in the court. So let's take some of the strategy that Mordechai used. You're powerless, basically. Your country has been destroyed. Your king has been exiled. Yet Mordechai puts himself in the court, in the seat of power, not in the Jewish quarter of Persia, but within the Shoshana Bira, he's around the king's court is where the action is. So that's important also. He hears about the plan to bring in the woman, and he puts Esther, and he instructs Esther how to get chosen by doing what's told, by not telling your nation. He gives this strategy to Esther. It's all strategic. It's all political behavior. You might even say almost Machiavellian in his analysis of what has to be done. But there's a very big point which he differs from Machiavelli, and we'll talk about that in a minute. He hears about the plot to kill the king. He makes sure to say that in his name, conveys that to Esther in his name, and who knows, it's an advantage that he uses, like maybe even like a strategy, every strategy, you don't always know where an advantage is going to be in your favor, but you look for advantages and take those advantages. Mordechai did that. And of course, when it came time to play the advantage, he called Esther and he asked her to do something. And then she decided to do something else. She also was strategic in the way she behaved. So what we see here is Mordechai and Esther, when there's no open miracles, then they have to rely on themselves. And it's such an important event that Mordechai and Esther saw about how the Jewish people can behave and can survive throughout in times where there's no open miracles, to survive throughout the period of exile, to realize that we have to act in our own advantage, to our own benefit, and not rely on God to come through, because there are periods where he is hidden. And this is what Mordechai and Esther saw as a new way of relating in the world. This way becomes the way, for example, that I just want to say before we go to what as an example, Esther tells the Jewish people, all the Jewish people, to fast on the Seder night. That's pretty bold, it's pretty courageous, it's pretty not religious, so to speak, but had to be done. Mordechai, no one tells him to do this, but refuses to bow down to Haman. Well, he put the whole Jewish people in trouble, but he knew that the conflict had to be brought up to the surface, because this evil person, Haman, and he knew he was evil, he knew he was a megalomaniac, and that eventually he would take control of power. So he brought the conflict to the surface, endangering taking a risk for the whole Jewish people. But that was a bold action that he took, because he knew that it had to happen. This Purim story and its message that we have to act, and sometimes act very, very courageously and to break with convention, becomes a model later on by the Hashmonaim in the story of Hanukkah, which happens about 200 years later, or maybe even more, 250 years later, where Mordechai, where the Hashmonaim, they make a couple of innovations that were necessary to defeat the Syrian Greeks and the armies and the Hellenizers that existed in their time. And they were necessary, for example, to make the idea that you can fight a war on Shabbat, but because before that wasn't the practice. So you have Mordechai and Esther really seeing the novelty of the event that happened in their time and what they did in order to survive. So they turn these days into, instead of just an event or practice, they turn it into irrevocable holiday. In fact, the Gemara says all the holidays will one day be nullified and canceled, but Purim will never be canceled. It's an amazing statement. It might be a little bit of exaggeration, but it just shows to what level the Hachamim appreciated what Mordechai and Esther did, and it might be saying something about the future of how Am Yisrael has to relate. A lot of analogies can be drawn to a current situation and what we saw, the miracle that we saw in the establishment of the state of Israel, and in the subsequent events that happened in Israel becoming a regional superpower and one of the leaders of the world in terms of innovation and patents. And it's no secret that the major events that led to the establishment of the state of Israel, which is definitely one of the biggest historical events that happened to the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years, was something that happened by the actions, strategies, maybe even machinations of human beings, of the Zionists of the late 19th, early 20th century, and the tremendous human behavior, human action in God's apparent being hidden that the Jewish people took on as a Jewish national action that was done. Yes, not all the Jews agreed. Yes, there were those who disagreed, and there was a lot of controversy within the Jewish people, but ultimately it is the behavior, I would say even the secular behavior, the political behavior of the Jewish people that led to this tremendous historical anomaly, and even we can say a miracle. So this model of action, human action, that has to happen when God is God is hidden, becomes the model for much of Jewish history, and definitely modern Jewish history. And that's why Mordechai and Esther saw this as a need of making a holiday. Now I want to go back to the Hebrew words of the verse, and we have the English as well. So these words over here in Hebrew, Kiyamu v'kibelu haYehudim alehem, the Jews undertook and irrevocably obligated themselves. I'd like to comment upon a rabbinic statement about comparing Har Sinai, the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, to what happened in this story. And it's the rabbis compare, and they said on Mount Sinai, this is when, if you have to say, this is the establishment of the Jewish people was being connected to God. There's the giving of the Torah, maybe the main historical event in history, Jewish history. The foundational event is Ma'amad Har Sinai. The rabbis say that in that time, the Jewish people accepted the Torah because they were forced to accept it, and they re-accepted it again in the time of Mordechai and Esther out of choice. And this is a tremendously brazen statement by the rabbis. They're comparing the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai after the exodus from Egypt to an event that happened 1,000 years later, 800 years later, that happened to all the Jewish people, but was being saved from annihilation. But why make that comparison? What they say is, in the time of Mount Sinai, they accepted it because they were forced. And here, the Jewish people accepted the Torah willingly. My rabbi's rabbi, Cham Salman David Sasson, Alav Shalom, explained this in the following way. he said that the Mount Sinai, the accepting of the Torah on Mount Sinai, happened after so many miracles. And so it was so apparent to the Jewish people that God existed and that God was on their side that they didn't really have a choice. They didn't really have a choice whether to accept or not, because it was beyond anything normal that happened. And it was very apparent to the Jewish people. They saw their enemy, the sea split, their enemy drowning within it, and they were saved. They saw the plagues. There was no choice involved over here. It was they really had no choice other than to accept it. But in the story of Purim, God doesn't occur, at least not apparently. So if they decide, and we decided at that point, the Jewish people decided to accept even this new holiday, they decided to accept this holiday. It means that the Jewish people accepted out of choice, knowing that sometimes they could have decided not, but they decided to continue, because if God was not apparent, God was hidden and doesn't even occur in the story. And so the rabbis equate what happened subsequent to the Purim events with another Mount Sinai event, a renewal of the connection of the Jewish people, this time out of choice, this time without tremendous revelation. That is it plays very much into what's happening in our days. Any questions at this point? And I'm willing to go on. Just feel free. Okay.
I have a question about the significance of Purim in Persian history. Is there any recollection of Shushan and the holiday of Purim?
The recollection of Shushan, and we think we know which king it was, but there's no in the Persian annals, there's no story like this. So there's no outside validation of the story, and the events. There's something mentioned in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah that speak about Tzorei Yehudim, speaks about someone who was an enemy of the Jews, and about letters being written and about stopping the building of the Beit Mikdash. But the decree to kill all the Jews and the subsequent Jewish people defending and killing all their enemies does not occur in any Persian annals, to the best of my knowledge. And also the name of the Queen Esther does not occur there.
Looks interesting. I mean, is that?
I stopped recording.
Is that?
So this represents change in the way that the Jewish people relate to reality. It says basically that when God is hidden, we have to act ourselves, and that's why Mordechai and Esther decided to make this into a new holiday. Now, if we go back to sharing, because as we said, making a new holiday wasn't so well accepted, and we read in this next verse that Esther had to send a second letter of Purim for the purpose of confirming the full authority, the mention of Mordechai, of Mordechai the Jew. In other words, it was a campaign to make this into a holiday, and the way that things were sent all over the country, all over the empire to have the day for the Jews to protect themselves and kill all their enemies Also, the same thing was done regarding the this making a new holiday, and they sent it out. They shlach sefarim and kol Yehudim. They sent to all the Jews in all the 127 provinces with an ordinance of equity and honesty. In other words, divrei shalom ve'emet. That's probably the way they spoke. They spoke in a letter, the way you say dear so and so, probably a formal thing. But what was the content of the letter? The content was that to observe these days of Purim in the proper time, and as they've been obligated by Mordechai, a Yehudi, a Jew, Queen Esther, and just as they assume themselves and their descendants obligations, the fast and their lamentations, Divrei Samov V'Zakatam, and that's what we're going to have this Wednesday. It's still to this day done. And U'amar Esther ki yam divrei HaPurim ha'ele v'nichtav b'sefer, and these became the Purim. It was written in the book. In other words, it was included in the canon, and the Mordechai and Esther are successful. And now we're talking about 2,500, 2,400, 25, about 2,500 years later, we're still keeping these days as it became part of the Jewish calendar because of the message of these days that Mordechai and Esther so rightly saw as necessary to be the part of what we remember all the time, every year. Each holiday carries with it a message to be applied in our own days, and the message of Purim is that we will, when God doesn't act openly, it's upon us to act strategically with great faith. And these are the things that I want to now recap some of the events and some of the actions and strategies that Mordechai and Esther had, some of their characteristics, really. Number one, they were completely active. They took advantage, they saw opportunities, Mordechai at first and then Esther afterwards. They saw opportunities and always moved to their advantage, but not to their personal self-interest advantage, but to the advantage of what they saw their role as being involved for the Jewish people, and thinking about the Jewish people's advantage, that it's good for the Jewish people to have a person near the court. It's good for the Jewish people to have a person that's married to the king, and they did reveal what they didn't have to reveal. That's number one. Number two, very important other aspect of their behavior. They were bold. They were bold, courageous, and able to take risks. And that is a certain type of confidence that comes possibly from a faith that they had, and we see Mordechai's faith coming forward, but also with the idea that unless you act boldly, you don't get anything accomplished. When you swim with the current, you're not really swimming. When you're just following along. When you have the courage to break from the current, when it's necessary to do so, and I'm not saying just to break for the sake of breaking, but I'm saying that when it's necessary to do so, to break from what everyone's doing, that requires courage. When Mordechai decides not to bow down to Haman, even though everyone was doing it, but Esther decides to visit the king when she wasn't called, at the pain of death, that requires courage. And there's a third element of their character, and that may be the most important element. As I said, and I want to be honest and connected to the way the book represents itself. The book doesn't talk about God, but there is a faith that Mordechai has that things will turn out right. He says to Esther, very important statement, I think one of the critical statements in Tanakh, that if you don't save the people, there'll be salvation will come from other corners. Where does that faith come from? Where's Mordechai's so strong conviction that that there'll be salvation coming from, they'll be saved from in other ways? He tells Esther, you're not my last hope, you're one of my hopes. And he's sure it's going to happen. I think that faith is a faith that reality and human beings as a whole want things to be good and just. Humanity as a whole strives for a justice. And what Haman was doing was unjust. Mordechai maybe had faith in humanity, in the goodness of people, that somehow, some way, this will turn out well. Esther was one of the ways it could have, one of his plans. We don't know if he had others, because this one worked. But maybe he even just had a faith in reality. It's not just chance, but reality is geared towards goodness and survival. And this is even without taking a religious perspective. This is taking just a deep perspective on the world, that somehow things will, because that's what people generally want to happen, things will turn out well. Adding that now to the fact that Mordechai is a person of faith, a person of belief in God, that it could be based on, it's probably based on that as well. That we believe that God will make things happen good for the Jewish people. And that raised the question of what happened in Nazi Germany and in Eastern Europe, what happened with the Ukrainians and with the Polish and all the people that ended up the Jew hatred that happened in the middle of the 20th century. And it raises the question that we'll talk about it in another opportunity, probably after Pesach. At the end of all that, though, we do see the Jewish people did survive, and the plans of our modern day Haman, which was Hitler, Yamach Shemo, did not get carried out. His plan was to rid the world of the Jewish people, and here we are, and he isn't. So somehow, some way, there's a faith that Mordechai had that it'll turn out for the best. These are the three elements: his action, his taking small advantages when they're available for him, his boldness and Esther's boldness and courageousness, and his ultimate faith in the goodness of things that will turn out, things will turn out well. And the book ends with the following verses. Talks about the taxes that he put on the lands, and all the mighty and powerful acts, and a full account of the greatness to which the king advanced Mordechai are recorded in the books of King. They're not really recorded, but according to they are recorded. And then for Mordechai, the Jew ranked next to King Ahasuerus, was highly regarded by the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all his kindred. In the Hebrew, and this is something that Megillat Esther said, that it could be translated as it was translated here, the multitude of his people, but it also can be translated as by the majority of his people, and that implies, and the book of the Masechet, the Talmud, the Masechet Megillah makes this point explicitly. Yeah, the majority of the people liked Mordechai, but not everyone did, and we know that even by Moshe Rabbeinu, there were those who were against him throughout all of his leadership. And this also is a good point that the rabbis are making, that with any leader, you're not going to have 100% of people in favor of him. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, even Mordechai, after what he just did, it's not 100% ever. And you can't, the leader has to lead, regardless of whether it's popular or not. He has to be able to take his people to places where they have to go. And even if it's going to be unpopular with some people, if you can't lead from behind. You have to lead with charting out and thinking about what's best for your people and moving your people from that direction. And that's what we had with Mordechai and Esther. Any questions? More than happy to take questions.